Welcome to everyone here and those attending virtually. Thank you all for joining us. I also want to thank APOYOnline for inviting me to participate in this panel. I expect that everyone here, some of the time, is an educator and/or a trainer. I am sure every one of us is a learner much of our time. That is certainly true for me. I spend much more time being a learner than being either an educator or a trainer. Both roles are important. Still, expecting that other panelists will speak to education and training, in my backward way of looking at things, I want to reflect on my experiences in learning. In particular, I want to focus on what lessons in learning I would have conveyed to my younger self if I could have, and if the younger fellow would have paid any attention to such an old fart, especially when I had my COVID beard going. Each of us faces a mountain of learning to be achieved through our careers. Initially, we must acquire a foundation of information and skills. For that, we adopt the roles of student, apprentice, intern, and emerging professional. We depend on teachers and mentors, as well as access to recorded information in the forms of text, pictures, videos, and so on. We also rely on networks within relevant communities. Imagine if there was an organization striving to provide that to all of us. My goodness, that would be something to participate in, appreciate, and support. But by being here, you have demonstrated that you have already learned that. And good on you. Well, what is the message that I wish I had received as a younger version of myself? It would have been to push myself to learn in a broader range of subject areas, to better balance the breadth and depth of my education. At this level, what we learn is known as received knowledge. We usually need to accept it as being true, but one of my favorite sayings is attributed to Mark Twain. That might be a misattribution, but it certainly seems like something Mark Twain could have said. The saying is, "It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure that just ain't true." I like this so much, not because it is clever and funny, although it certainly is both, but rather because I think it is so deeply insightful and widely true. Some psychologists use the term contaminated mindware to describe what you know for sure that just ain't true. As humans, we tend to think that what we know, understand, or believe has been carefully crafted by the workings of our minds. That is not the case. Most of what our minds contain is received knowledge, accepted without us validating it. One example we are all familiar with is thinking, well, if stable relative humidity is important for preservation, then certainly plus or minus 5% should be better than plus or minus 10% for most collections. Many of us held that conviction for decades, though most of us now understand that it would only be relevant to few, if any, items in each of our collections. Fixing what we know for sure that just ain't so requires developing and using skills in critical thinking. So what would I communicate to my young self? That would be, find yourself a mentor or mentors skilled in critical thinking and learn from them, and or seek out other ways to learn the skill. There are many resources for that, such as the Critical Thinking organization at this obvious web address. Critical thinking is not easy, At least it has not been easy for me to learn and practice, but it is valuable, even critical, and leads to what I identify next as the greatest skill for learning. Perhaps this would be better called a disposition than a skill, but I don't think it is necessarily an innate disposition, but is something that can be developed as a skill with practice and effort. And that is intellectual humility, or profoundly understanding that what we know can only be a truth from a certain perspective. That in turn leads to recognizing not just the value of, but the need for striving to understand the world from other persons' perspectives. So, whoop, there we go. So, what message would I want to convey to my young self? I would want to say something like, young self, I know you're pretty clever, and by the time you're 14, you will think you know everything. Trust me, it just ain't so. So, how can each of us sustain continuous learning throughout our career? In my opinion, it requires regular occasions of critical and reflective thinking, not continual, since continual critical thinking can impede our emotional learning, and that is equally or more important than technical learning. It is an issue I thank Jane Henderson for regularly mentoring me on, urging me to develop my emotional as well as my intellectual humility and empathy. This saying summarizes the most important lesson I have learned. The limitation on my learning has more to do with how ready I am to learn than what is readily available to me to learn from. I admit that I am fortunate to live and work in Canada, a country where educational resources are abundant in my native language. Still, throughout the Americas, we have the good fortune of APOYOnline making heritage management information and networking ever more available to us all. Still, I encourage anyone to reflect on whether our disposition toward and skills in critical thinking and intellectual humility might be as much a limitation on learning as ready availability of external learning resources. And with that, I thank you for your attention, and I look forward to our panel discussions.